The galactic peacekeepers had seen it all. Tyrants who ruled planets with iron fists, sentient war machines that harvested civilizations, and pirate lords who could destabilize entire economies with a single whisper. Earth's criminals, by comparison, were a joke. Commander Aurel Voss leaned back in his seat, armored fingers drumming lazily against the console as the transport ship descended through Earth's atmosphere. Reports on the planet's underworld scrolled across the screen beside him, and he barely suppressed a chuckle. Organized crime? Laughable. Extortion, narcotics, assassinations. Things so primitive they barely warranted a second glance in the grander scheme of galactic crime. Hard to believe this place still operates with paper currency. Lieutenant Jex scoffed from the opposite seat, his blue-skinned face twisted in amusement as he skimmed through intercepted human communications. They even have something called omerta, a code of silence among their criminals, as if loyalty means anything in crime. The rest of the squad chuckled. It was always like this when they arrived on backwater planets, especially ones that still clung to ancient traditions of crime and punishment. The peacekeepers weren't just enforcers of law. They were the iron will of civilization itself. Compared to the cyber syndicates of the Vescan Rim or the flesh cartels of Cthar, Earth's mobsters were like children playing at villainy. This should be a simple sweep, Voss said, exhaling slowly. We round up their so-called crime lords, make a few public examples, and the rest will scatter like rats. The ship touched down in the heart of a sprawling metropolis, its neon glow struggling to pierce through the smog-choked air. The humans called it New Moscow, a relic of their old world, a city built on the bones of forgotten wars, and the dreams of those who thought crime could be controlled. It was a festering pit, and yet, to the peacekeepers, it was nothing more than another job. They stepped out in full gear, sleek black armor glinting under artificial streetlights, their weapons humming with the faint energy signature of containment fields. A few civilians backed away at the sight of them, but most barely reacted. Fear was common in these parts, though the peacekeepers had been expecting more. Voss gestured toward a nearby establishment, a dingy bar pressed between two towering blocks of concrete and steel. The kind of place where criminals felt safe, where information flowed freely if you knew how to ask the right questions. The moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. Conversations faltered, glasses were set down, and a thick tension settled over the room. A single glance told them everything. These were criminals, small-time players trying to act like kings of their own little empires. Voss took his time surveying the room, letting the weight of their presence settle before speaking. "We're here for information," he announced, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who is used to being obeyed. "We know who you are, what you do, and where you do it. If you cooperate, you might just walk away from this." No one moved. The bartender, a scarred old man with cybernetic eyes, wiped the glass with slow, deliberate motions. "Information on what?" he asked, voice gravelly from years of smoke and regret. Voss activated his display, letting the holographic images flicker to life above his wrist. Faces of human crime lords appeared, their dossiers detailed with every crime committed, every deal struck. It was a comprehensive list, built from weeks of surveillance and intercepted transmissions. The peacekeepers knew everything. But as Voss scrolled through the names, he noticed something. A pattern. One name that wasn't there. He turned his gaze back to the bartender. "We have files on every major player in this city," he said. "Every smuggler, every enforcer, every syndicate leader. But there's a name that keeps coming up in whispers, yet we find nothing on them." He leaned in slightly. "Who is Baba Yaga?" A silence fell over the room, thick and suffocating. The bartender stiffened, his hands gripping the edge of the counter with white-knuckled tension. Around them, patrons averted their eyes, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Jex raised an eyebrow. "Did we hit a nerve?" The bartender exhaled slowly. "Forget that name." Voss narrowed his eyes. "I don't think so." The old man shook his head. "You don't get it. There are criminals, and then there's that. You think you're dealing with people who play by rules, even the bad ones. But Baba Yaga," he hesitated. "Baba Yaga doesn't play." One of the younger peacekeepers, a recruit named Vesk, let out an incredulous laugh. "You're seriously scared of some Earth myth?" No one laughed with him. The bartender wiped a hand over his face, looking suddenly tired. "You came here thinking you're the biggest monsters in the room," he muttered. "That you can handle anything Earth throws at you." His cybernetic eyes met Voss's, and for the first time that night, the commander saw something unexpected. Not defiance, not resentment. "Pity? Turn around," the bartender said softly. "Leave while you can." Voss's jaw tightened. He had faced warlords who turned planets into graveyards. He had hunted criminals who could rewrite identities at the genetic level. And yet, here he was, being worn away by a man who sold watered-down liquor to lowlifes. His communicator crackled to life before he could respond. "Commander, we have a situation," a voice reported. "Several of our teams have gone dark." Voss frowned. "Dark? What do you mean, dark?" "No signals. No distress calls." One moment they were reporting in, the next silence. The room felt colder. Voss exchanged a glance with Jex before activating his helmet interface, pulling up the last known locations of the missing teams. They had spread out through the city, systematically rounding up the crime syndicates. There had been no signs of resistance, no indication of a coordinated counterattack. And yet, they were vanishing. The bartender let out a long, slow breath. "You should have left when you had the chance." Voss clenched his fists. "Find me a lead on Baba Yaga. Now!" The old man said nothing. He simply poured another drink and slid it across the counter to no one in particular, as if the conversation was already over. Somewhere outside, in the vast shadows of the city, something stirred. Rain fell in sheets, turning the streets of New Moscow into slick rivers of neon-lit reflections. Commander Aurel Voss strode through the darkened alleyways, his squad moving in practice formation behind him. The city pulsed with a quiet tension, a suffocating silence that wrapped around them like a noose. Something was wrong. They had stormed crime dens before, cracked syndicates that spanned solar systems, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. Their missing teams had sent no distress calls. No bodies had been recovered. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist. Voss activated his communicator. "Jex, report." Static hiss in his ear, but there was something beneath it, a faint whisper of movement, breathing, then a click. Silence. He stopped mid-step, hand tightening around his rifle. Jex had been stationed 3 blocks away with a secondary team, tracking a suspected syndicate stronghold. There had been no indication of hostiles. No warning. And now, nothing. The squad shifted uneasily. "What the hell is going on?" muttered Vesk, his youthful bravado from earlier now laced with uncertainty. "This isn't how criminals fight." Voss said nothing. He scanned the rooftops, the windows, the endless maze of alleyways where shadows pooled in unnatural ways. He had the sinking feeling that they weren't hunting anyone. They were being hunted, a blur of movement. Voss barely turned in time before something struck the soldier beside him. A strangled gasp, a flash of steel, and the man was gone, yanked into the darkness so fast that his scream never even had the chance to escape. The squad erupted into chaos, rifles snapping up, scanning every direction. The peacekeepers were trained for battle, but this was something else. There was no enemy to engage, no visible opposition, just whispers of movement, shadows that seemed to breathe. Another scream, cut short. Voss spun, his helmet's targeting system struggling to lock onto anything. "Form up, back to the..." A shape materialized behind one of the soldiers. A flash of silver. Blood sprayed across the alley walls. The body collapsed before the others even registered what had happened. "Fall back." Voss barked. The squad broke into a sprint, moving toward the extraction point, their advanced armor making them nearly impervious to conventional weapons. But it didn't matter. They weren't fighting something conventional. Vesk fired blindly into the shadows, his plasma rounds searing the walls of the alleyway. He didn't stop running. "Who the hell fights like this?" he gasped between breaths. "They're ghosts!" A hand shot out from the darkness and caught him mid-stride. One moment he was running. The next he was gone. Voss barely had time to react before a whisper brushed against his ear. A voice, cold and steady. "You thought you were hunting criminals." He spun, rifle raised, but there was nothing there, just the city breathing around him, the distant sound of sirens, and the unshakable presence of something that should not exist. The squad had started with 10. Now they were 3. The remaining soldiers pressed their backs to a nearby building, scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. One of them, a veteran named Ralph, was breathing too fast, his hands shaking against his weapon. "Sir, what the hell are we dealing with?" Voss didn't answer. His mind worked through every possible scenario, every known tactic of warfare. None of them applied here. There was no pattern, no hesitation, just something that moved with absolute certainty, a predator among prey. Another whisper, this time from the comms. "Your mistake wasn't underestimating Earth's criminals." Voss looked up, a dark shape perched on the edge of the rooftop, silhouetted against the flickering neon. Not just a person, a presence. Baba Yaga, the legend, the myth, the thing the criminals feared. And now, the thing the peacekeepers feared too. Voss barely had time to shout before the figure moved. A blur, a strike. Reltha's throat opened in a spray of crimson before his body even had time to collapse. The last soldier panicked. He turned to run, but the figure was already behind him. A single, efficient movement, and he crumpled. Voss was alone. He raised his rifle, heart pounding against his ribs. Baba Yaga stood before him now, close enough that the commander could make out the details beneath the hood. The mask, smooth and expressionless, barely reflected the light. But it was the posture, the stillness, that sent ice down his spine. This wasn't someone who fought for territory, for money, or even for survival. This was something else entirely. The comms crackled to life again. "You should have listened." Voss fired. The plasma round sliced through empty air. Baba Yaga was already gone. A sudden pressure against his back. A voice just above a whisper. "You never understood your monsters." The world tilted. Pain bloomed in his chest. Voss staggered, dropping to his knees, hands clutching at the blade buried deep between his ribs. His vision blurred as he struggled to breathe, the taste of iron thick on his tongue. Boots scraped against the pavement as Baba Yaga stepped in front of him, tilting their heads slightly, studying him like one might study an insect pinned beneath glass. "Tell your people," the voice said, quiet and absolute. "Earth's criminals are nothing to fear." Voss gasped, choking on his own blood. "But me?" The voice lowered to a whisper, the last thing he would ever hear. "I am worse." The world faded. The Galactic Peacekeepers never sent rescue teams to recover their fallen. That was not their way. When a unit went dark, they were presumed dead, their mission marked as a failure, their names quietly erased from active records. But the silence surrounding Earth's operation was different. It wasn't just another lost team. It was an absence that gnawed at the edges of command, an emptiness that whispered of something far worse than death. Within days, word spread through the ranks, growing like a sickness. 10 highly trained operatives had landed on Earth. None had returned. No transmissions, no distress signals, just a fading pulse on the mission logs before even that was wiped clean. The higher command refused to acknowledge the loss. Earth was not a priority. It was a minor world, an inconsequential pit of primitive crime syndicates and outdated warfare. But the whispers did not stop. The recordings surfaced next. Grainy, fragmented footage pulled from damaged peacekeeper armor, smuggled through back channels by those who had no business looking. The clips were inconsistent, scattered, but they told a story nonetheless. A soldier walking through a dimly lit alley, a flicker of movement, a scream cut short. The same alley now empty, blood on the pavement, but no body, a shadow moving through the neon haze, too fast for scanners to track. A single word, spoken through the static of the final transmission, Baba Yaga. Some dismissed it as a fabrication, the paranoia of those unwilling to accept that an elite squad had simply failed. But others, those who had seen entire planets burn, who had faced the worst the galaxy had to offer, felt something else. A weight, a truth too unsettling to ignore. Earth had no warlords, no cyber syndicates or flesh traders, no criminal empires capable of challenging the peacekeepers. And yet, 10 soldiers had vanished, and in their place, Only a name remained. The official response was swift. Earth was flagged as unstable. Not a threat, not an enemy, but something infinitely worse, an unknown. The peacekeepers did not return. They did not retaliate. They simply stopped looking. And the galaxy took notice. The crime lords who had once laughed at Earth now turned their eyes toward it with careful unease. If the peacekeepers had failed, what did that mean for them? If their enforcers, their unshakable hand of control, had been silenced in the dark alleys of a world they deemed insignificant, what did that make a thing that had silenced them? Trade routes shifted. Smugglers rerouted their operations. Bounties that had once been placed on Earth-based syndicates were quietly withdrawn. Earth's underworld, once viewed as weak, was now left alone, not because it was strong, because it was unknown. The streets of New Moscow remained unchanged. Business continued. Criminals still fought over territory, still whispered in dimly lit bars, still killed over debts unpaid. Life on Earth did not pause to consider the implications of what had happened, but in the places where those whispers ran deepest, in the corners of the world where fear spoke louder than greed, one truth held firm. There were monsters in the galaxy, but Earth had something worse, and it had a name.